But if you're the National Football League, okay, clearly it's not about talent anymore. It's about something else. And I'm going to tell you, I spent a large amount of the last 24 hours thinking about nothing more than I was thinking about collusion. One other item I wanted to get to before we go to break, and that is Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders, the QB2, backup quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, finally got to see some action. Dylan Gabriel, the starting quarterback, goes down with a concussion. Myles Garrett is having a hell of a day. Sacked Lamar Jackson 4 times. Has 10 sacks in the last 3 games. Just a monster. That's what Myles Garrett is. Just a monster. Clearly doing his job.
The NFL didn't expect this conversation to happen this early. One side of the screen had Stephen A. Smith, a voice the league has listened to for decades. The other side didn't even need to be on camera, because Shedeur Sanders' words were loud enough that it started after the win. Not with trash talk, not with celebration, but with confidence, the kind that makes veterans uncomfortable. Stephen A. didn't attack Sanders. He questioned the timing. And in the NFL, timing is everything. Was Shedeur Sanders speaking like a leader? Or was he speaking too soon? That question split the league almost instantly. Fans believed. The media heard pressure. Former players heard responsibility. And suddenly, this wasn't about a single game anymore. It became about who gets to speak like the guy. And when Stephen A. Smith has built a career calling out players who talk before proving it, Shedeur Sanders has built his identity doing the opposite, letting confidence come first. That collision is why this moment exploded, not because of disrespect, but because of expectation. This video isn't about picking sides. It's about understanding why this debate matters more than people realize, and why the NFL is paying very close attention to how Shedeur Sanders handles this moment. Because once media starts questioning how you speak,
An investigation as to why they didn't draft a quarterback. How you don't draft a Shedeur Sanders? How you don't do that, knowing how debilitated you are at the quarterback position, spanning years? I'm not saying you didn't draft a quarterback at all. I know they drafted a quarterback, but I'm talking about Shedeur Sanders. I'm talking about somebody early in the first 2 rounds.
Here's what I can tell you about the draft.
they're already assuming you matter. To understand why this debate exploded, we have to rewind, not to a tweet, not to a headline, but to tone. Stephen A. Smith didn't come out yelling. He didn't dismiss Shedeur Sanders. And he didn't say Sanders was wrong. What he did was something more dangerous. He questioned when, on ESPN, Stephen A. framed his concern carefully. He acknowledged Sanders' talent, his poise, and his composure. But then he paused. The kind of pause that tells you a bigger point is coming. And that's when he said it. Words to the effect of, "I love the confidence. But the NFL is a league that humbles people quickly." That line mattered. Because Stephen A. wasn't arguing against confidence. He was arguing against early ownership. In the NFL, there's an unspoken rule. You earn the right to speak as the guy after the league has tested you. And Stephen A. believes that the test comes with time, failure, and scars. From his perspective, Sanders hasn't seen that yet. That's the root of the disagreement. Shedeur Sanders didn't sound like a rookie processing a win. He sounded like someone setting a standard. And Stephen A. questioned whether the league had permitted him to do that. This is where fans misunderstood the take. They heard criticism. But what Stephen A. was really saying was, be careful. The league is listening now. Because once the NFL hears confidence, it demands consistency. Stephen A. has witnessed this cycle unfold dozens of times. Young quarterbacks rise quickly, speak boldly, and then face a wall, a bad game, a bad season, or a brutal stretch. When that happens, the same confidence gets replayed, not as...
Travis Hunter plays for primetime Deion Sanders. There ain't an athlete or an entertainer in this country that don't know how to get in touch with primetime Deion Sanders. And you could get to Travis Hunter. You don't have to sit up there and blast him out on social media. He's a young man. Dez, me, everybody else included. When we were their age, what kind of mistakes did we make? What kind of mistakes were we prone to? Let's have some compassion when it comes to trying to look out.
Leadership. But as evidence, that's the fear he was pointing toward. But here's what makes this situation different. Shedeur Sanders didn't speak emotionally. He didn't boast about stats. He didn't challenge opponents. He spoke calmly, deliberately, almost like he expected scrutiny. That's what made Stephen pause, because confidence without arrogance is harder to criticize. Still, Stephen remained steadfast in his position. He emphasized that quarterbacks become leaders through time, not statements. Through absorbing pressure quietly before addressing it publicly. And from his experience, the NFL doesn't reward early declarations, it tests them. That's where fans split. Some agreed with Stephen. They saw wisdom, protection, a reminder that the league is unforgiving. Others saw something else entirely. They observed an old-school gatekeeping mindset, the notion that young quarterbacks must remain silent until permitted to speak. And Shedeur Sanders represents the opposite generation. A generation that believes belief comes first and performance follows. That's why this debate feels bigger than one player. It's about how leadership is defined in today's NFL. Stephen comes from an era where quarterbacks earned their voice by surviving adversity. Sanders comes from an era where confidence is part of preparation. Neither side is wrong, but the clash is unavoidable. And here's the key part people missed. Stephen never said Sanders would fail. He said the league would challenge him harder now. And that's exactly what happens when you speak with authority. Defenses listen. The media listens. Opponents take notes. The margin for error shrinks. That's the reality. Stephen was warning about. So this debate isn't about ego. It's about exposure. And Shedeur Sanders just stepped into full view. Which brings us to the next question. How did Sanders respond? Not with words, but with presence, once this criticism reached the public? Because that reaction is where the story really shifts. What happened next is what truly separated this moment from every other media debate. Shedeur Sanders didn't tweet. He didn't go on a show. He didn't fire back with a quote. Instead, he stayed quiet. And in today's NFL, silence can be louder than any response. As Stephen A. Smith's comments circulated, fans expected a reaction. That's how modern sports culture works. Every criticism demands a rebuttal. Every take invites a clapback. But Sanders chose a different path, and that choice changed the tone of the entire conversation. Rather than addressing the debate directly, Sanders doubled down on the same thing that sparked it in the first place: composure. At practice, teammates noticed it immediately. No visible frustration. No forced leadership speeches. Just routine. Just preparation. That matters. Because quarterbacks don't lead with words first. They lead with habits, and the NFL noticed. Former players began shifting their language. Analysts who initially focused on Stephen A.'s caution started asking a different question. What if this kid actually understands the pressure? That's when the narrative cracked open. Fans started pulling clips, not of Sanders talking, but of how he carried himself. How he handled the huddle. How he responded after mistakes. How he never rushed his process. The confidence Stephen A. warned about didn't escalate. It stabilized. And that's the detail nobody expected. Because usually, young quarterbacks either shrink after criticism or overcompensate. Sanders did neither. That restraint forced media voices to adjust. Some doubled down, saying silence doesn't equal proof. Others began acknowledging that the lack of reaction itself showed maturity. And that's when the debate became uncomfortable, because now it wasn't just about whether Sanders spoke too soon. It became about whether the league is uncomfortable with how prepared he looks. Fans started defending him, not emotionally, but logically. They pointed out that Sanders never declared himself elite, never disrespected veterans, never dismissed the grind. He simply spoke with belief. And belief isn't arrogance, unless the system sees it as a threat. This is where generational tension surfaced. Older analysts emphasized caution. Younger fans emphasized empowerment. And Sanders sat in the middle, unbothered. That forced the media cycle to slow down. Instead of escalating drama, the conversation deepened. What does leadership look like in the modern NFL? Is it earned only through suffering? Or can it be built through preparation and confidence? Sanders' silence didn't answer those questions, but it forced people to ask them, and that's powerful. Because the moment you make people question their framework, You've already won part of the battle. Stephen A. Smith himself subtly shifted tone. Not a reversal, but a recalibration. Less about warning Sanders, more about watching him. That shift matters, because Stephen A. doesn't watch players he doesn't believe could matter. And now, Sanders was officially on that list. The league followed. Opposing teams took notice. Game planning adjusted. Expectations rose, and pressure followed, which brings us to the most important part of this story, because confidence without response is one thing. Confidence under pressure is another. And the next phase of this story will decide whether Stephen A.'s caution was wisdom, or whether Shedeur Sanders is redefining how quarterbacks step into leadership roles in the NFL. Every NFL career has a moment that quietly defines everything that follows. Not a touchdown, not a contract, not a headline, a moment where pressure arrives before proof. For Shedeur Sanders, this was that moment, because this debate wasn't really about what he said, it was about what the league expects young quarterbacks to be. And whether Sanders fits that mold. As the media cycle cooled, something important happened behind the scenes. Teams stopped reacting and started evaluating. Front offices weren't focused on the debate. They were focused on response patterns. How Sanders handled scrutiny, how he carried pressure, how he managed attention without losing preparation. That's what NFL decision-makers value most. Talent gets you drafted. Composure keeps you employed. And Sanders checked a box many young quarterbacks fail to. Didn't try to win the argument. He let time do the work. That alone signals maturity beyond years. Because quarterbacks who chase narratives often lose themselves. Sanders avoided that trap. And here's the uncomfortable truth for critics. The league is shifting. The old model, where rookies must be silent, deferential, and invisible, is fading. The modern NFL requires quarterbacks who can process information, manage personalities, and handle public pressure instantly. Sanders grew up in that environment. Media scrutiny wasn't new to him. Expectations weren't foreign. Cameras weren't distracting. So when the criticism came, it didn't shake him. It validated the stage he already expected to be on. That doesn't guarantee success. But it explains the confidence. And confidence isn't dangerous when paired with discipline. Now the stakes are clear. If Sanders performs, this moment becomes a footnote, proof that early criticism missed the point. If he struggles, critics will replay this debate as evidence of premature belief. That's the margin quarterbacks live in. And Sanders knows it, which is why his next stretch matters more than anything he's said or not said. Every snap will be filtered through this lens. Every decision will be magnified. Every mistake will be measured. But so will every moment of poise. And that's where the future splits. Because the quarterbacks who survive aren't the loudest. They're the most stable. Right now, Sanders has shown stability. That doesn't crown him, but it earns patience. And patience is rare in the NFL. Stephen A. Smith didn't crown him either, but he did something just as important. He acknowledged the possibility. And that's the gateway moment, because once the league admits a young quarterback might be different, the conversation changes forever. Sanders isn't fighting for validation anymore. He's fighting for proof. And proof comes only one way. On the field. This debate didn't expose Sanders. It exposed expectations. And now the league is watching closely, not to see what he says next, but to see who he becomes when the lights stay on.